Hello everybody and welcome to World Talks. My name's Don Arleth and let's get started. Two very important elections today. The final runoff in the Romanian presidential election, according to exit polls, has pro-EU, pro-Ukraine candidate and Mayor of Bucharest, Nicușor Dan, winning the election with 55% of the vote. His opponent, anti-EU nationalist populist George Simion, rejecting the results and claiming victory. Here in Poland, the first round of the presidential election also took place today. Exit polls indicate that civic platforms Rafał Trzaskowski and Karol Nawrocki, aligned with law and justice, will face off in the runoff 2 weeks from now. And now joining me to discuss these pivotal elections is Dr. Spasimir Domaradzki, political scientist at the University of Warsaw. Sir, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for the invitation.
A very nail-biting, interesting night. I don't know where to start. Let's start in Romania with these elections. I mean, we saw Simion take a really big lead in the first round of elections 2 weeks ago, and tonight I'd say it's quite a surprise. Now, if these exit polls hold and it keeps him ahead with 10 percentage points, indeed, I think this would be surprising. But what do you think that these results show about the democratic process there in Romania?
Well, this is actually a big issue, because if we take a look at the results in the current moment, well, it's quite a huge gap between both candidates. However, we need to be aware that there is an enormous Romanian diaspora. And the votes there in the first round showed clear sympathy for Simion. The second thing that is no less concerning is actually the fact that both candidates announced that they won the elections, which is even more worrying when you think that you have an exit poll with almost 10% gap, and you declare and you have the feeling. So I'm very much concerned that in terms of the perspectives for Romanian democracy, we can see a small repetition of the experience from the American elections when Trump lost to Biden, and I'm very much afraid that this is a model that will not turn well for Romanian politics. On the other hand, we see a very clear gap between the two candidates, which allows to argue that most probably it will be Nicușor Dan that will win. We saw an enormous mobilization with a relatively high voters turnout in Romania, high mobilization within the cities, which is also quite telling that this gap between rural and city votes and the need to challenge the nationalist narrative usually associated with more rural areas was taken seriously by the voters in Romania. But we still don't know these two elements. First of all, what will be the result of the voters from the diaspora, from outside? And secondly, what will be the political reaction of Simion?
And we've heard for the last 2 weeks that voters in Romania are pretty much fed up with the mainstream political candidates that have run the country, say, for the last 30 years, and that a deep-seated change was needed. How can we explain such a radical difference in numbers all of a sudden?
Well, let's put it that way. If we look at the results from the first round, it's quite interesting that actually Simion was not able to accumulate much more support than he got during the first round. He got 41%. The gap between him and Nicușor Dan was 20%. But what you see in practical terms is, I think, to a huge extent, an awareness about the nature of the political choices which people face. If you have an option to vote for this cheap narrative of nationalist pride, and Simion is particularly we need to be particularly careful about Simion for one reason. He wouldn't have been where he is now if it was not the story of Călin Georgescu. But in comparison to Georgescu, he is much more radical. So I think that even those who were fed up with the political system, they are also concerned about what Simion can do. On the other hand, Nicușor Dan is also not a representative of the mainstream. He's actually probably the only individual who, as a politician, was capable to turn his back on the mainstream politics when he was feeling that he is not being supported. He made it to the post of mayor of Bucharest, and he remained faithful to what he thought was necessary, also with a critical attitude towards the political constellation in Romania. So in practical terms, we can argue that we have two candidates that indeed try to bring a change. However, very different types of change in Romania.
Now, if Nicușor Dan is going to be the winner of this election, what will that do to Romanian foreign policy? Will the country go in any different direction than we've seen previously?
Well, let's put it that way. Much more changes we would see if Simion becomes president. Romania is currently in a very similar position to Poland in terms of its attitude both towards Ukraine, towards the war in Ukraine, towards Russia, its position in relation to the European Union. So in that sense, we would most probably see a certain continuity, and actually the elections were not about the international standing of Romania. They were about the nature of internal politics. They were about the nature of how the gap between the political elites and the society is widening, and this is where actually both candidates have enough room to be active. So it will not, if Nicușor Dan is going to be the Romanian president eventually, that will mean that Romania will actually remain on the same course, both in the context of the war in Ukraine and towards the EU.
Okay, well, now I'd like to switch gears here to Poland because we have these, we've got pretty much a dead heat between Rafał Trzaskowski and Karol Nawrocki with a really high voter turnout. If we take 66%, which I believe is the last update that we had, voter turnout is quite high, especially for the first round. Based on these numbers and based on the turnout, what are your predictions for where this is headed?
Well, let's put it that way. Rough calculations are not very encouraging for Rafał Trzaskowski. Even if we assume that the left candidates, including the representatives of the current governing coalition, will naturally support Trzaskowski, these numbers are not enough to win the elections. So what is also very important is that the result of Karol Nawrocki, we are only talking currently about exit polls, so it's really tight situation, and we don't know within the next several hours whether we are not going to have a complete turn of these results. If that will happen, that's going to be a big blow for the predictions that were being, let's say, presented over the last several weeks. But what is more concerning is that Trzaskowski will need to reach out for the right-wing voters if he wants to challenge Nawrocki in the second round.
Now, both candidates had last-minute scandals that either hurt or helped them, depending on who you ask. What influence do you think that these scandals had on these election results? Do you think that it swayed voters for Rafał Trzaskowski against him, or voters of Karol Nawrocki against him for
I will be a little bit more critical here on that note, because I will say that whether we like it or not, the nature of Polish politics is to a huge extent a tribal politics, and the scandals, I have the impression that sometimes have exactly the opposite result to the one expected by those who blow them out. Instead, there are always justifications why our candidate did that and how the others aim to destroy him. So that kind of fuels even more support and mobilizes voters. What is really important is that if we look in comparison to the parliamentary elections 2 years ago, when it was actually the popular mobilization that went out and revealed the power of democracy in Poland. Currently, we see that with such a high turnout, the Polish society turns right-wing. And it is a very serious matter what to do with these voters who are actually ready to pick up narratives that are ready to completely turn upside down Polish politics. People like Grzegorz Braun, but also some of the arguments that were presented by Mencen are things that are in their essence dangerous not solely for the, let's say, current political elections, but for the nature of Polish politics. And it is a big question how to manage these voters now, how to reach out to them, and also how to diffuse their concerns related to the current political spectrum.
And I'm torn now between a question about if you're Rafał Trzaskowski, what do you do over the next 2 weeks? And well, also what happens if the current political scene stays as it is, meaning that you have a president that opposes the ruling coalition. So let's try both in a very short time.
Let me start with the second one. I think it is slightly easier in the sense that if we have a continued cohabitation with a president from Law and Justice and the coalition government, there can be two scenarios. One is a mobilization within the current coalition around the awareness that there is a huge chance that they will lose if they do not make a more significant impact in the Polish society. And the second one is that the coalition partners will see these results as a situation which will require reshaping of Polish politics and will have early parliamentary elections.
Okay. We're going to have to hold the first question for another time. Dr. Spasimir Domaradzki, political scientist at the University of Warsaw. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate it. And that concludes this edition of World Talks. Thanks for joining us, and stick around because there is more to come here on TVP World.